In April 1999, the Royal Navy destroyer HMS Valiant was operating in deep waters of the Western Pacific, several hundred miles east of the Mariana Trench. The mission was routine, a 2-week deployment to test a newly upgraded towed sonar array designed to improve long-range detection of submarines in complex thermal layers. The sea was calm, the sky pale with high clouds, and the crew had settled into the slow, methodical pace of a technical trial that promised little more than paperwork and boredom. Lieutenant James Carter, the ship's sonar officer, had the midnight watch on the third night of operations. He sat in the dim operations room, surrounded by softly humming consoles and the green glow of sonar screens, listening through his headset to the familiar background chorus of distant shipping and scattered marine life. Beside him, Petty Officer Oliver Briggs, a meticulous technician with a habit of double-checking every reading, leaned forward to study a faint contact forming on the edge of the display. At first, the return looked like interference or a drifting school of fish, but it quickly resolved into something larger and more defined. The object was deep, far below the thermocline, and moving at a steady pace that kept it parallel to the destroyer's course. Carter adjusted the filters and increased the gain, his heartbeat picking up as the contact grew stronger instead of fading away. He called for Chief Petty Officer Mark Hughes, the senior sonar specialist, who arrived still fastening his uniform shirt. Hughes had spent over 25 years tracking submarines, whales, and every other acoustic signature the ocean could produce, and he trusted his instincts more than any automated classification system. He watched the contact's movement for several silent minutes before speaking in a low voice. "That's no whale," Hughes said finally. "Too deep, too steady, and it's matching our speed." Carter reported the anomaly to the bridge, and within minutes the ship's captain, Commander Richard Holloway, was informed. Holloway was a seasoned officer in his early 50s, known for his calm decision-making and an almost stubborn refusal to overreact without clear evidence. He ordered the sonar team to continue passive tracking while he came down to the operations room himself. The unknown contact remained at a distance of roughly 3,000 yards, holding a depth of nearly 1,800 feet. Its acoustic profile did not match any submarine, known marine mammal, or geological feature. The more they watched it, the more its behavior resembled something deliberate rather than accidental, as if the object were pacing them, studying them. At 3:17, the contact suddenly dove deeper and vanished from the sonar display, leaving behind only the normal wash of ocean noise. Carter was about to mark it as lost when a deep vibration rolled through the hull of HMS Valiant, strong enough to rattle loose tools and send a mug sliding across a console. It was not the sharp jolt of a collision, but a heavy, scraping sensation, as though something immense had brushed along the ship's underside. Hughes immediately ordered an active sonar ping, despite Holloway's earlier preference for passive tracking. The powerful pulse shot down into the black water and returned with a crisp, unmistakable echo. On the screen, a vast, elongated shape appeared directly beneath the destroyer before darting forward and disappearing once more into the depths. The onboard computer struggled to classify the contact and finally displayed a vague label, unknown biological. The estimated length exceeded 40 feet, possibly more, and its speed during that brief sprint had surpassed anything they had ever recorded for a creature of that size. At the morning briefing, Commander Holloway gathered his senior officers along with the civilian oceanographer aboard for the trial, Dr. Sarah Whitmore. Whitmore was in her early 40s, a respected marine biologist who had spent years studying deep-sea ecosystems and the behavior of large pelagic predators. She examined the sonar plots and the rough size calculations with a mixture of fascination and disbelief. "There is nothing in modern marine biology that fits these dimensions at that depth," she admitted. "Even the largest sperm whales rarely operate that far below for sustained periods, and their movement patterns are completely different." Holloway ordered the deployment of the ship's remotely operated vehicle, hoping to obtain visual confirmation. The yellow ROV was lowered over the side and began its slow descent into the dark, its cameras transmitting grainy images of drifting particles illuminated by its floodlights. The crew crowded around the monitors as the depth counter ticked steadily downward. At around 1,700 feet, the water beyond the lights was pitch black. The ROV's cameras showed only swirling sediment and the occasional flash of small, startled fish. Carter guided the submersible toward the last known bearing of the mysterious contact, while Whitmore watched intently. For a fraction of a second, the monitors displayed a broad gray flank and what looked like a pale, scarred underbelly. Then the ROV lurched violently, its feed spinning as alarms sounded across the control panel. The final image before the signal cutout was unmistakable, a gigantic mouth lined with rows of triangular teeth, closing over the ROV's frame. The screen went to static, and the tether cable jerked before going slack. Crushed length of metal where the vehicle had been torn away. Dr. Whitmore examined the puncture marks along the severed section with trembling fingers. The indentations were deep and clean, spaced evenly in a pattern that suggested an enormous jaw. After several minutes of silent calculation, she spoke the word that everyone else had been thinking, but none had dared to say aloud. Megalodon, she whispered. The idea seemed impossible, yet the bite radius, estimated jaw strength, and size of the creature they had glimpsed aligned disturbingly well with fossil records of the prehistoric shark. Commander Holloway refused to accept the conclusion outright, but he could not ignore the mounting evidence either. He ordered the recovery of the towed sonar array and prepared to leave the area, deciding that scientific curiosity no longer outweighed the risk to his ship. As the stern crew began winching in the quarter-mile cable, Carter watched the sonar display nervously. The massive contact had returned, holding position nearly 2,000 yards astern and several hundred feet below the surface. When the array started moving, the creature reacted instantly, accelerating toward the ship at a speed that made Carter's throat go dry. Contact closing fast from the stern, he reported, his voice tight. Holloway did not hesitate. Cut the array loose, he ordered over the intercom. I want that cable clear before it reaches us. The command came seconds too late. The destroyer shuddered as something enormous struck from below, lifting the stern and throwing sailors off their feet. A grinding scrape reverberated along the port side, followed by the thunder of snapping cables as the towed array was torn free and lost to the depths. Damage control teams rushed to assess the situation while Carter tracked the creature racing beneath the ship and circling away. The hull had not been breached, but several sections of plating were dented and scored with deep gouges that ran parallel for several meters. The pattern looked disturbingly like the drag of teeth across steel. That afternoon, Commander Holloway called all officers to the wardroom. He stood at the head of the table with a chart spread before him, his expression grim but controlled. We are dealing with a large, aggressive marine predator that has already attacked this vessel twice, he said. Whether it is some unknown species or something thought to be extinct, it is now a direct threat to the safety of this ship and crew. He authorized the arming of depth charges and Mark 46 torpedoes, weapons designed for submarine warfare, but equally capable of damaging any solid object underwater. The crew moved to a higher state of readiness, and HMS Valiant altered course slightly to maintain open sea room while still keeping the contact within sonar range. Throughout the evening, the creature maintained a steady distance of 3,000 to 4,000 yards, pacing them like a wolf shadowing a wounded animal. Dr. Whitmore briefed the officers on what was known from the fossil record about megalodon behavior, explaining that they were believed to be ambush predators that targeted large prey from below. The pattern of circling and probing attacks they had experienced matched that theory all too well. As darkness fell, the tension aboard the destroyer grew almost unbearable. Every creak of the hull and every spike of static in the sonar feed made men flinch. Carter remained at his console, eyes fixed on the glowing display that showed the enormous contact slowly closing the distance once more. At 2042, the creature accelerated toward the ship, rising from a depth of 500 feet and angling upward on an intercept course. Carter relayed the data to the bridge, and Holloway ordered the helm to turn so that the ship's stern faced the approaching threat, allowing depth charges to be deployed directly in its path. The crew at the fantail stood ready, hands on release levers, waiting for the command. "Stand by," Holloway's voice crackled over the intercom. "On my mark." When the contact reached 600 yards, he gave the order. A pattern of depth charges splashed into the dark water and sank rapidly before detonating in a sequence of violent underwater explosions. The shockwaves slammed into the hull and rattled every compartment, but on sonar, the effect was immediate. The creature's smooth track dissolved into erratic loops and sudden dives. For several minutes it retreated, only to regroup and approach again from the port side at even greater speed. Holloway escalated the response, authorizing the launch of 2 torpedoes. Carter watched their acoustic signatures streak toward the target, guided by their own active sonar pings as they homed in on the massive shape. The first torpedo detonated close enough to generate a massive pressure wave that blanked the sonar display momentarily. The second exploded seconds later, overlapping the first blast. When the echoes cleared, the contact was still present, but moving sluggishly, its once precise course replaced by uneven, wavering motion. The creature descended to a depth of over 1,000 feet and drifted away to a distance of nearly 4,000 yards. It no longer attempted to close with the ship, instead lingering on the edge of detection range as though reassessing the situation. Holloway ordered the ship to maintain course and speed while remaining at full combat readiness. For nearly 2 hours, the wounded predator stayed in that distant position. Then, slowly, it began to withdraw toward the deeper waters to the southwest. Carter tracked the fading signal until it finally slipped beyond the reach of the sonar array, leaving only the ordinary background noise of the ocean behind. Relief spread through the ship, but it was tempered by exhaustion and disbelief. They had just fought and driven off a creature that, by all accepted science, should not have existed. Dr. Whitmore spent the rest of the night reviewing data and comparing the tooth spacing in the hull gouges with known fossil measurements, her earlier uncertainty replaced by quiet conviction. The return voyage to base took 4 days, during which sonar watches were doubled and the crew remained alert for any sign of the creature's return. None came. The ocean seemed empty again, as though the enormous predator had been nothing more than a nightmare shared by everyone aboard. When HMS Valiant docked, a team of naval intelligence officers and scientific advisors was already waiting. Over the next several days, every member of the crew was interviewed, and all logs, recordings, and physical evidence were collected. Dr. Whitmore reluctantly handed over her notes and calculations, aware that they would likely disappear into classified archives. The official report that emerged weeks later described the incident only as an encounter with an unidentified underwater object that had caused damage to the ship's hull and equipment. There was no mention of a prehistoric shark, no reference to the ROV footage or the torpedo engagement. Among the crew, the sanitized explanation felt hollow compared to the terror and wonder they had experienced. Lieutenant Carter carried the memory of those nights with him for the rest of his career. He continued to serve on other ships and tracked countless contacts across the world's oceans. Yet none ever matched the size, speed, or intelligence of the creature they had fought east of the Mariana Trench. Every time his sonar screens lit up with a large, unknown return, a part of him braced for history to repeat itself. Dr. Whitmore eventually left naval research and joined a civilian oceanographic institute, where she quietly pursued studies on deep-sea predator migration and the possibility of undiscovered megafauna. She never publicly claimed to have seen a living megalodon, but in private conversations she admitted that the evidence they had gathered convinced her beyond reasonable doubt. To her, the encounter proved that the deep ocean still held secrets capable of rewriting scientific understanding. Commander Holloway retired several years later with a reputation for steady leadership under extraordinary circumstances. When asked about the most challenging moment of his career, He would sometimes mention a classified incident involving an unidentified underwater threat. He never elaborated, but those who had served under him during that deployment understood exactly what he meant. For the crew of HMS Valiant, the story became a quiet legend shared only among themselves and trusted friends. They knew what they had tracked on sonar, what they had seen on the shattered roll feed, and what had scraped its teeth along their ship's hull. Official reports could deny it, and scientists might argue about it, but the memory of that colossal shape moving through black water remained as real to them as the steel beneath their feet. Even years later, whenever Carter stood on a ship's deck at night and looked out over a calm, empty sea, he found himself imagining what might be moving in the darkness below. The ocean covered most of the planet, and only a fraction of it had ever been explored in detail. Somewhere in those vast lightless depths, creatures older than human civilization might still be hunting, unseen and unrecorded. The encounter taught him a lesson he would never forget. Humanity might dominate the surface of the oceans with ships, satellites, and sophisticated sensors, but the deep remained a realm where ancient life still held the advantage. On that April night, steel, training, and modern weapons had driven a prehistoric predator away. Yet the ocean had reminded them all that it still kept its oldest secrets hidden just beyond the reach of their instruments.